Hello and welcome to Simbin, the show where we chew over the major disciplinary talking matters in the world of Rugby League. My name's Rod Studd, I'm here to referee proceedings, which was a bit ironic since one of our guests today is refereeing legend Steve Ganson, now the head of the Rugby League's match officials department. And also with us is the former Super League star Nathan McAvoy, now a key member of the match review panel. Welcome Steve, welcome Nathan.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you both. Steve, let's just start with you. Just sum up the season so far for us. I mean, there's always contentious matters in Rugby League refereeing. How have you seen the season going so far?
I think the season's been really good. On the field, we've seen some really good matches. I think the attendances, the television games, the Sky Premier Sports, Channel 4, it's been excellent. In terms of the referees, I think they've done a really good job on the whole. They've done really well, so I'm pleased with where we're up to.
Good, okay. Come back to it in a minute, Steve, but just first I want to just have a quick chat with Nathan. Nathan, people will remember you strutting your stuff, notably for the Bradford Bulls in the glory days, Salford amongst others. I can name other teams, Leeds, Wigan.
Leeds, Wigan, yeah. Leeds, Centurions is where I finished my career.
Yeah. How has Nathan McAvoy ended up on the match review panel?
Yeah, well, a bit of a long story really. Retired about 14 years ago.
No, really?
Yeah, 14 years now. I know it's a long time. It's almost as long as I was playing, you know. So, but yeah, a short time after my retirement, the RFL got in touch with me and asked me if I wanted to be a part of the disciplinary committee on the ORT at that time, the Operational Rules Tribunal. To which I accepted. I did that for a couple of years, and then I worked my way up into the match review panel, which was something that I always sort of aspired to be once I'd done my time with the ORT.
Well, I believe you considered actually going into the Ganson brigade and becoming a referee. What happened with that?
Yeah, very early on, again after my retirement, I thought refereeing would be something that I'd be really interested in getting into. For whatever reason, it didn't quite come about, but I have done some refereeing on an amateur level. I can tell you it's not an easy job.
No.
Yeah.
Now Nathan's on the panel that meets every Monday to review all the incidents that go on in Super League and Rugby League matches. Steve, you oversee the whole of the Rugby League's match officials department. Now, one thing that we know has happened in the last few days is that a meeting between the match officials department and coaches. Some coaches weren't happy with the way games were being refereed and indeed being reviewed, Nathan, and the bans and the decisions and the simbinings and the red cards. What was the upshot of that meeting, Steve? What happened there? Because I think it's worth telling the viewers.
Yeah, the upshot was, if you remember going back to round one, Rod, there was some quite serious foul play in the early rounds of the competition that in any other time, any other season, those players would still have been sent off. And then in different ways, it was reported that there was some type of clampdown. But if you look at the level of offence and the matches that were received by the players, at any time, those players would still have been sanctioned. However, like anything, I think the referees potentially got one or two calls wrong. The ones that spring to mind immediately was the McGillivray one at Castleford, Huddersfield game, and obviously the one the Wigan incident with Field. Yeah, Mahe Fanu and Field. And I think sometimes within the game it's good to chat with the coaches, good to talk about where we're up to. And I think the general feeling was, we need to be a little bit guarded on these type of front-on tackles. Players, sometimes contact can be incidental. Not everything is a sin bin. And I think at times we've got to be open and say, we misread one or two along the way there. However, one of the things about the meeting is we all have a level of accountability to the sport. And what it doesn't mean is that the referees will back off. It just means that the referees also need to be a little bit more mindful in some of these, and sometimes it is a little bit more game sense. But the coaches, the players and the referees, I think the one thing that came out of the meeting is we all have a level of account to the game, and we've all got to work a little bit closer together. And there's no harm in having these meetings and speaking openly to each other about where we've got to and where we can be better.
So is there a feeling that maybe referees were a little bit, for want of a better phrase, trigger happy, and they just need to rein it in again? But the overall message is that the game is still going to be tough on dangerous tackles.
Absolutely. We have a duty occur. Remember all of this. This is a duty occur to the players. It's not a refereeing clampdown. It's knowledge of the sport that we need to have. As we get more knowledge about certain injuries, etc., the sport needs to devise ways that we protect the players. Ultimately, they're our athletes, they're our future, people who are starting off playing the game. We have a responsibility as a governing body to oversee that.
Yeah, the referees referee the game minute 1 to minute 80, and then you guys sit back and review it. Those are two independent processes, Nathan. There's no correlation between the two, really. You do your job, Steve and his referees do theirs.
Yeah, so the match review panel is an independent body. We obviously operate within the rules and the guidelines that the RFL set out, but yeah, they are two completely different bodies.
Yeah. Now, Steve, you used the word accountability there. Now, this is something I want to put to you because I see this allegation and accusation quite a lot, and you do too, no doubt, and the referees. Yeah. And it's, why aren't referees accountable? Why aren't they reviewed? Why aren't they accountable? And I don't know what people want because, I mean, human beings make mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes occasionally. I think I made one in 2003, actually. God, just thinking back. But you know, we all make mistakes, and I don't know what people expect the punishment to be for referees to make a mistake. Is it, you know, putting the stocks outside, heading leave and Lee's next play at home? I'm not sure, but just explain how you review your guys and how they work, you know, week to week after a match. What would happen? Say a referee referees Leeds v Wigan on a Friday night. What happens then, Steve?
The referee will then review his performance minute by minute. Every basic decision that he makes, or non-decision even, and he'll complete a big spreadsheet minute by minute.
So what if the ref comes back and says, do you know what, Steve? God, I was good last night. I was tremendous. And you think, well, hang on a minute, mate. I mean, you know, I've had a quick look and you've got this wrong and that wrong and the other wrong and you were out of position here and there. So what happens then?
Sometimes we've got to burst the bubble.
Yeah.
And, you know, I sometimes tell them, don't complete the lie sheet. You know, let's have facts. It's very hard when you know, one of the things about reviewing anything minute by minute is you have a personal belief in what you're doing as being right, and it's hard to sometimes step back and look at things and go, I didn't manage that situation as well as I could have done, got this wrong, this has this outcome. So on the whole, the referees are very, very I'd say critical of themselves, but sometimes it's difficult. Also, they're aware of social media, they're aware of the talk around the game. It's hard to not be when you're heavily involved in it. And then they have a coach, including myself, who looks at everything as well. And then we do a review as a group, and the group talk about, you know, for example, we start at round 1 that we're talking about. We looked at all those tackles in review, and we talked about, did we feel we were at the right level? So the McAvoy incident that we mentioned and the Fanua incident, the referees involved and video referees were clearly told that that wasn't correct, that they were the wrong decisions, but we look at why they were the wrong decisions. And
sometimes there's a reason that you didn't get the right view, you were obscured or what have you,
or we didn't get a replay from one angle at that particular time because we don't control our own replays. But the next part of it, the referees, the game a few years ago when referees went full time, they wanted accountability. Yeah. Because as you say, people think the referee turns up, does whatever he does, and away he goes and he gets the game next week.
Yeah, that's the allegation.
Yeah. That's not quite true. And if people look at the roster and look at the appointments, they will see that referees miss games. Now, I'm not going to be in a process where I'm going to go out and publicly criticise the referee because that's just too much. However, I have conversations with coaches, I have conversations with clubs, the referee themselves, and the referees are paid by performance. So the referees...
How does that work, Steve?
Well, if they referee major games in a year leading into a final.
Right.
So the Wembley referee this year, the grand final referee this year, just like a player, the ones who do the biggest games, perform the best, they obviously get the best in terms of the contract the year after. Right. Now that's how it works. So when people say the referees don't have anything, they just get paid in, they go in again, that's not true. The referees are very, very much held to account for the performances, and it does financially affect the referees as well, and rightly so in some respects. You know, players will say, well, it's our livelihoods. Coaches and club owners will say the same. It's the same for the referees. We're all accountable.
Right. Okay. And, you know, we should mention, I mean, referees have to make, I don't know, you probably calculate it to the nth degree, hundreds of decisions, certainly in a match, maybe even thousands, when all the officials are taken into account. And, you do get a tiny number wrong, a tiny percentage wrong. But referees do get quite a lot right, Steve, don't they?
We have a high level of accuracy, but as you know, we're in a world where people demand perfection.
That's right.
And also that, you know, I accept that referees' decisions can have big bearings on games and clubs and people's futures and their own futures as well. But they do, on the whole, a very, very good job. They make a lot of correct decisions. Unfortunately, they are human, and from time to time they get things wrong.
Okay, Steve, so we've got some footage here you might want to talk us through.
Yeah,
This
if
is
you ask it,
Leeds
this is
versus Hull.
about people making decisions. You know, you see the player there, just puts his foot on the touchline. You know, we don't use a video referee. The touch judge here will come into shot, and he's coming down the touchline here. We've got the player heading towards the foot's on the touchline. The touch judge is looking straight at it, gives a decision more or less straight away. That takes a fair degree of skill. We look at this one again. As players moving across the field, and again, you know, it's very, very, very close. There's two decisions there actually. There's whether the foot's on the line and who plays the ball last.
And we know though, if the flag goes up and then after 25 replays in slow-mo, it proves that he was a millimetre in the field of play, there'll be this social media outcry of like, why didn't he go to the video ref? We saw that at the weekend in Wakefield's game at Warrington. But I mean, the fact is, you could stop and review every play if you wanted. The game would last from 8 o'clock till about 8 in the morning.
We could,
but we don't want that, do we?
What you're seeing from here is, you know, people will often say, well, they don't want to make decisions. Here's the first minute of this year's season.
Yeah.
And Gil Dudson throws a punch, little bit of a melee. We've only been going 16 seconds into a brand new year, and then Gil Dudson will be put in the sin bin. Now, you know, they're all incidents where referees and touch judges are prepared to make decisions on the field. You know, as you can see, it's clear there.
Yeah.
That was mandated again before the season started. There's no direct punching going to be allowed. We look at this. Teams as well have, you know, you talk about accountability of referees. Well, teams are also accountable. So you look at this particular incident here, the referee awards a penalty for a team. It's coming right close to half-time. So tactically, Leeds are interfering in the ruck here against Salford. So player gets penalised. And then we look at what happens from here. It's clearly a penalty. And then part of this is to look at the amount of times the referee awards 6 again in the ruck. And the clock's coming down. You know, obviously Leeds tactically want to go in with a lead at half-time. And the referee is attempting to allow Salford every opportunity to attack here. As you can see there's another very, very slow ruck. Referee wipes it down. Come back here again. Referee tries to keep the game going. Got every opportunity again to attack. It's obvious there, hand on the ball. Another 6 again. So now the referee's under a fair bit of duress here because the team is not, you know, he's not complying with what the rules should be.
Persistent infringement.
Yeah, but there's another one. He wipes it down again.
In fact, if I was Salford, I'd be screaming for a yellow card by now.
So if you look at the clock's coming down, counting down here. And then eventually the referee puts the player in the sin bin. Now, is the referee at fault for that, for applying the rules, Rod?
Well, I mean, as I like to say, if the players played within the rules all the way through the match, there'd never be a penalty or a yellow card given, would there?
Exactly.
The referees only blow what they see. In fact, if anything, it was Jack Smith, wasn't it? I would say he was overly patient. That would be my. If I was the Salford coach, I'd have been screaming for a yellow card well before it came.
So you see again there, a player breaks and the ball's touched by a defender. Ball travels forward. Salford are entitled to pick up the ball and go on and score. So referees, you'll see, have been prepared to make decisions, and they've been held to account for the ones that they've got wrong.
Yeah, One other thing, of course, along with accountability, the other buzzword from people on social media and coaches and pundits is consistency. Now, we know the human race as a species isn't very consistent. No human being is that consistent, but how do you try and get as consistent as you can be?
Well, we talk, like, when we do reviews and we do group reviews, we look at incidents where, for example, you'd look at the 6 agains that have been given, and we look at them across the group and go, are we right on this? Is our tolerance correct? But also, Rod, what you've got to remember, 2 games are not always the same.
No.
2 decisions, 2 incidents of foul play.
They're not exactly the same, are
but
they?
they're not exactly the same.
No. And then they ask you to use common sense, which is usually a discretion, but it's almost impossible to get consistency and common sense, because consistency is almost ignore common sense and just do the same thing like a robot.
Yeah. So let's go back to the coaches meeting that you talk about.
Yeah.
One of the key points that come out of that meeting is the referees to have a feel for the game.
Yes.
To
common
have some
sense.
feel. But by having feel, you use the word discretion. So you've got to put it in the hands of the official to apply discretion of he sees fit for that particular game. Now, with that, there has to be an element of maturity around that. Not everything's black and white. So the referees have got to be allowed to have some feel. One of the important things where this is a professional product, people pay the money to go and watch it. I think the general consensus is people don't want to see players sent from the field for 10 minutes for something that potentially could be downgraded and reviewed thereafter. That was a feeling by the club. So there was some understanding that the MRP, also independent of the referees, can pick up things post-match, and that is far more palatable than a borderline call and a player going the sin bin.
Okay. Let's bring Nathan in, because Nathan, we're talking to Steve about consistency there, but your panel strives for consistency by having the same 4 guys: Phil Vivas, Paul Dixon, yourself and Paul Cullen.
Yeah.
You know, they're every week reviewing and discussing and chewing things over between you before coming to a decision.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at some of the decisions you've made in the first few weeks, and we'll start with the most infamous tackle, I think, of the Rugby League season so far, the Will Pryce on Connor Wynne. Here it is now. This is Hull against Huddersfield.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to watch that. It's a real shocker, isn't it? Just to explain what the panel looked at there and what you concluded.
Well, I think for the panel, it was for me anyway. It was probably one of the worst examples of a dangerous lift or a dangerous throw that I've seen for a while. I know the defending player Will Pryce is particularly upset about what happened, and rightly so. I mean, it was a very dangerous outcome. There's a few elements that we looked at. The first one was the momentum of the tackle. As the defending player is turning him, he gets bumped as well, which adds to the spinning of the tackle. But as he's got him in that position where he's facing the wrong way, if you like. He's then used his hips to thrust the player up, but also used his upper body to drag the player down. That's what gets that's the pivot point. Was the hips. Normally it's an arm or it's a shoulder on a dangerous throw such as that, but this time it was the hips, which makes the tackle much more elevated. Obviously the arms are on the upper body as well, pulling the player down, and that's what gets the player into a very, very dangerous position. And the dangerous position is where the hips are above the shoulders. Sometimes it can be a much shallower angle, but on this one it doesn't get much more serious, much more worse. Sorry. The final element to it was the driving of the player into the ground onto his head and neck. Sometimes what happens here is the player will lose control and will let go of the player. But in this instance, he didn't. He's kept hold of the player. He's lost his feet off the ground, sort of kind of jumped up in the air a little bit to add to the momentum of the tackle and to the force as well. Nothing's intentional. Like we can't. I'm not going to say that Will Pryce did this intentionally. It was just very, very reckless, and the force and the lack of separation between the arm and the body into the ground added to the force and the impact.
I think it's important to stress this is not a character assassination of Will Pryce as a human being. This is a dissection of a challenge and using due process to review it and charge the player. Now, there are certain sort of levels of of disciplinary offences that you can issue a fixed penalty notice, 2-game ban, say, for example, which a player can accept or challenge. But in this instance, it's so serious, it must go above you at the match review panel to the disciplinary panel itself, which is chaired by a Crown Court judge, I believe, and with 2 other ex-players on the panel with him to review it and produce a sanction. That's what happened, wasn't it? Yeah.
So it's important to know that as a match review panel, we don't issue the amount of games that a player gets banned for.
Yeah.
We only charge an incident. And we charge the incident based on what we can see, on face value for what we can see. Also based on consistency, like you said, so we will go back to other incidents that we've seen that are very similar. And we'll make sure that whatever we're charging at, we're charging it at the right grade. Again, do mistakes happen? Sometimes they do. Do we all agree as a panel? Not all the time, we don't agree, but we have to come to a decision.
Right.
We are very close most of the time on all the decisions that we make. Funnily enough, the ones that are hardest to come to a decision on are the cautions and the grade A's. The thing like the incident that we just saw there was probably again like I said, one of the worst incidents that I've seen for a while. So straight away it pushed it up to a grade F, and the ORT, the Operational Rules Tribunal, they issued the 10-game ban because a grade F is I think it's 5+ games.
Yeah, and there'll be things like Pryce's previous record taken into consideration, and all sorts of things like that. And I think, in all honesty, most people thought 10 games was a perfectly reasonable sanction. There was an outcry from some people who thought it was too tough, and 1 or 2 thought it wasn't strong enough. But I think generally most people thought that was a pretty reasonable sanction for that tackle, which was horrific, as you said.
And it was, and Will took it very well. You know, he saw what he did was wrong. I'm sure he's going to learn from it. He's a fantastic player, and he's going to come back even stronger. Obviously, he's got some time now to think about it and assess and improve himself as a player through training and coaching, and that's only going to be beneficial for him and for the game as well.
Yeah, I think you would think, or you would hope, that it would affect his behaviour going forward, and also other players knowing that is a complete no-no, and that needs to be eradicated from the game before something awful happens.
Rod, you hear from the process where Nathan describes all the mechanics of the tackle. The referees have, Liam Moore in this case, has one look at that incident live, in play, and makes a decision to put Will Pryce from the field. Now Liam will then submit a report, but he doesn't have he doesn't sit there and review to the depth that the MRP do to look at all the mechanics. He just has one shot of it with the officials, make a decision on the field. I don't think anybody said, obviously, that shouldn't have been dismissed. And then the next part of the process is then independent of the referee,
So
which is really important.
That match, Steve, that we saw, which was Hull versus Huddersfield, was on a Sunday afternoon in Hull, away from the live broadcast of either Sky or Channel 4 or Premier Sports. So there was no video referee to assist Liam Moore there. He had to make the decision like that on off his own bat with the 2 assistant referees. Touches.
And I think that's the point. If I can just interrupt, is the point is that the referees will see what has happened, whereas we get to see not just what's happened but why it's happened as well. So we break it down. We can see, obviously, breaking it down into slow motion. A lot of people will say, "Oh, you're making it too sanitary by slowing it down and keeping it." But sometimes you have to do that at this level. And again, just going back to the scrutiny of the referees, is that not only do they scrutinise themselves, but they also get a match review panel that sees every single tackle, every single breakdown. We watch everything from on a Super League level as a match review panel, and the things that we do see, obviously, which need to be discussed, we do bring in, and the conversation with the referees is had as well. So yeah, it's a really good process. It's not perfect, but again, if it was perfect, then the players wouldn't make any mistakes either. So
let's move on to another incident then, Nathan. This is one involving Wigan's Tommy Leuluai.
Yeah.
And this is the match at home to Salford.
Yeah. Yeah. It's we had a good look at this one, and we determined that dangerous contact was made due to the mechanics of Leuluai's technique here. Basically what he's done is he's lifted both his feet off the floor for a split second. He's got 1 foot down, which has then gained him control again, but it's kind of a pinning motion between the ankle and the shin. It is very similar to another tackle that we've seen, but it's different. Even though we graded that at a grade B, the other tackle of Albert Vete was a grade C. A lot of people you know, we'll look
This
at
is the Vete one, is it? Yes,
yeah,
it
this
is,
is the Vete one.
Yeah.
You can see if there's a slow motion replay of this, you can see, from this angle, he takes his feet off the ground and throws all his weight down onto the ground and onto the ankles of the player. Now, this is more of a, much more a body weight contact than it is a pinning motion, which what Leuluai's was. Leuluai's pinned, and he also had 2 players above, which meant that he couldn't get his foot out of the ground, which, as he's turned and twisted, has caused some pain.
So what was the grading, Nathan? Sorry, Leuluai was...
So Leuluai was a grade B, Vete was a grade C.
Right.
And they were made, those decisions were made based on the fact that Leuluai did get his foot back into the ground, albeit he did take his feet off the ground for a very short time. When you take your feet off the ground, that's where we look at things like carelessness and recklessness. If you're taking your feet off the ground, you're not in control of where your legs and where your lower body is going. What we want to see is we want to see the players keep the feet in the ground as much as possible, affect the tackle from higher up, and we don't want to see any dangerous contact around those really kind of pivot points of the knees and the ankles where, the hinge joint such as the knee only bends in one way, and if we start to see any dangerous contact that pushes the knee in a manner that it's not supposed to, then we obviously have to have a look at it.
But all these things, Nathan, you're explaining them most eloquently, and these are things that you and Paul have explained to clubs and players pre-season, isn't it? And continue to help educate and help them by explaining which tackles are illegal and what the sanction will be if they commit such a tackle. So you would expect that coaches and players would be working on this, wouldn't you? Well, they should be, really, shouldn't they? Because
I mean, coaches have a duty as well to their players. I would have thought to make sure that they stay on the field of play. A lot of people talk about the fact that all we want to do is ban players, and we don't. It's quite the opposite, actually. What we want to do is we want to keep players on the pitch through good behaviour and through stopping injuries from happening. And the way we get that across is by talking to the referees about, like you say, illegal or outlawed or techniques that we don't like to see, which increases the risk of injury to players. And if we do see dangerous contact, then we have to discuss it and we have to talk about the fact that he's using a technique that we don't want to see. How do we stop that from happening? We have to charge him, and then he gets sanctioned with a ban, and that is therefore having a knock-on effect on keeping players from being injured and keeping them on the pitch also.
I mean, you played, I'm going to still say fairly recently, and so this allegation that rugby league has gone soft and it's not the game it used to be is that fair? Is it right, or is it still a very hard and difficult game?
Yeah, I tend to disagree.
It's just different.
Yeah, it's just different. I tend to disagree with it. I think what the RFL is trying to do is keep players from getting injured. Obviously, there's a lot of scrutiny about head injuries. There's a lot more information and research around concussions.
Yeah.
And if the RFL is seen not to be doing anything about that, then they're going to be held accountable, and they have to. So that's what they're doing. They're doing something about it. They're coming down strongly and harder on head contacts. I mean, you've never been allowed to hit a player in the head, since the game really began. So the fact that what we're trying to do is we're trying to get players to change their techniques, trying to change their behaviour to make the game safer. I think the game is just as hard and as tough as it has ever been. When you're doing the right thing and you're making the right contact in defence, then as a defending player, then the game can be tough. I mean, I watched the game in Australia. I watch it here. I've seen some cracking games, and I think it's. I think that the RFL is doing the right thing by the game. Especially when you consider from a grassroots level as well.
Yeah.
We want all players, young players, being interested in getting into the sport, and that comes from the parents who obviously want them to get into it, and
they want their children to feel safe playing.
They want them to feel safe playing it. Yeah.
Good, Nathan. Thanks for your input. Thanks for explaining the 3 cases we saw there on our footage. Steve, thanks for joining us today and explaining what's going on with the referees and how the process is continuing this season. I think it's been a good and entertaining start to the Super League season, and long may that continue. I hope you'll join us again on Simbin. That's all we've got time for this week, but we'll be back in a few weeks' time. Look out on the Rugby League social media channels for our next episode, which will be in about a month's time. In the meantime, thanks to Steve Ganson and Nathan McAvoy, and for myself, Rod Studd. Goodbye and thanks for watching.